Hi, and welcome to Signature Leadership by Knowledge Hook. My name is Jennifer Adams, and I'm the editor-in-chief of this Thought Leadership series, and really happy to have you here with us today. We know it's the end of the school year in the Northern Hemisphere, and it is time for summer vacation or winter vacation for those of you in the Southern Hemisphere. So we're really happy to have you here. Welcome. We are excited to be able to share this with you. We have 3 superintendents from throughout the US, and they're going to be telling us a little bit about their SEL story. I'd like to share a little bit about the sponsors for this activity, for those of you that haven't been with us before. The first is Knowledge Hook. Knowledge Hook is a digital math company out of Toronto, Canada, and it specializes in a platform that helps teachers with formative assessment and professional learning in mathematics based on the conceptual challenges that their students are having in their classrooms. So they have created a thought leadership series, and this is one of the things that we do as far as SEL Global Leadership Series. Our second sponsor is Karanga, and excited to see that we've got some of the Karanga steering committee members on with us today. Karanga came together in 2018. We were brought together at Salzburg Global Seminar to really talk about creating a network of educators and policy people that were trying to say, how can we make learning and education based very much on the whole child and social emotional learning? So they are our second partner. And our third partner is Salzburg Global Seminar, and it is an organization, a think tank that came together in 1947, right at the end of the Second World War. And the founders had the idea of trying to make sure that there was a place where we could be having thoughtful discussions and helping current and future leaders shape a better world. And, you know, almost 100 years later, we are still very much in need of that. And I like to think of the work that we're doing here as some of those possibilities. So those are our 3 sponsors. We're excited to have people that have registered from 4 Canadian provinces and territories, from 9 states across the US, and from 7 different countries. So we know all of you can't be online with us at the same time. Some of you are either working in your classrooms, in your schools, or in your districts. And for some people, it's the middle of the night. So you'll be getting the on-demand version afterwards. And I'm going to hand it over to my friend and colleague, Heather Singmaster. Heather is the director for Digital Promise, and she's been working on a project called the Global Cities Education Network. She is a friend and colleague from the Karanga Steering Committee, and she is going to introduce us to the report that her group has been working on. So Heather, over to you. Welcome.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thanks for having us. We're really excited to be here and share the work that we've been doing. Just really briefly, Digital Promise is a nonprofit organization. We are working to really ensure powerful learning experiences for all students, really centered on equity. So one of our initiatives is the Global Cities Education Network, which is a network of city school education systems that are working to examine best practice internationally and then adapt it and put it back into their systems. So we have representatives from cities around the globe who meet once a year in a symposium format. And really, we're building that community of practice by also meeting in between in webinars. In between those annual symposia, we open up the work to other districts who are interested in diving more deeply into specific topics. So we have different working groups. So what we're here to talk about today is our most recent working group that just wrapped up this spring, which was focused on social emotional learning in support of students with learning differences and really our most marginalized students. So in this working group, we had 14 international city teams. So they were members of our Global Cities Education Network, as well as Digital Promise's League of Innovative Schools, which is a network of innovative school districts across the United States. So we got together starting about 2 years ago. We had a bit of a delay due to COVID, but we really found that coming into COVID and doing this work was more relevant than ever. So we identified problems of practice, and each district created an action plan to address that problem of practice. And then we organized a series of technical assistance webinars to address those challenges. We did a virtual site visit to Surrey, Canada, where we saw some fantastic best practices by pairing each of our districts with a school in Canada, and they got to meet their SEL lead in each school, as well as talk with the district officials, because we really are looking at systems level work. And then we also did a study tour in person to Melbourne, Australia, to look at the SEL framework that they've been implementing across the state of Victoria, where Melbourne is located. We just released, as Jennifer mentioned, our report on the outcomes of this work, and I'm not going to share a lot from this because I know that our three superintendents who are here with us will do a much better job of talking about this and bringing it to life. But these are some of the high-level outcomes that we found from the working group. We found that every district took something and implemented it back into their system. Some of them are shifting their language from using social emotional learning to well-being. That was something that we saw in Victoria in Australia. Some were really looking at how do we address the students with learning differences, and how do we really support them using SEL. We know now that we really need to start with our adults first, our teachers, and those in the district office first. So we found different strategies for doing that. And then we looked a lot at that intersection of equity and social emotional learning. I'll pop the URL for this report into the chat too when I'm finished, so everybody can access that. Oh, and then if you're interested in learning more, or have questions about the working group or any of this work, feel free to reach out to me, and that's my LinkedIn QR code. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our fantastic superintendents. We have three of the superintendents who participated in the work here with us today, all from the US, but we're really excited to learn more from you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Erik Gundersen to get us started.
Thank you so much, Heather, and really a fascinating report. And you know, the four topics that you talked about: the learning differences, the SEL shifting potentially the language over towards well-being, or is it a subset of well-being, adult SEL and SEL and equity. On Knowledge Hook, on the SEL Global Leadership Series, we've had lots of different interactions on those different topics. So it'll be great to hear from Melissa and Gudiel and Erik about what it looks like in their different organizations. So thank you for that. That's great. I'm going to hand it over to Erik. And Erik, welcome. We're thrilled to have you here with us.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and thank you, Heather, for the intro and for giving Suffern Central this opportunity. And I know Gudiel and Melissa, the three of us and our representatives that came along with us on this working group and this study over to Victoria, really had an incredible experience. I'll give a very brief overview of who Suffern Central is. Suffern Central is a school district in the lower Hudson Valley, probably about 45 minutes to an hour outside of New York City. So we are a commuting suburb to New York City. And we have benefited a tremendous amount from this work. We embarked in this work prior to joining the group, but we've learned a lot, and I'll get into a couple of those things in just a moment. I'm very proud to share that we created a new position in Suffern Central this year called the Director of School Counseling and Wellbeing. Her name is Sarah Kern. She was on the trip with us as well, and together we brought back a lot of interesting perceptions and ways of looking at things that have really helped influence us in the last 6 to 8 months since we've returned. We can go to the next slide very quickly, just to give a very brief overview of our student composition. We are just at about 4,000 students in 7 different schools. Our high school has about 1,500 students. If you take a look at the demographics, we are, I believe, a reflection of the United States of America. Our demographics are very similar to what the overall United States looks like. We're about 50% white, about 30% Hispanic or Latino, 10% Black or African American, and about 10% Asian are Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, and we have a very small fraction of our students who identify as American Indian, and certainly we have a multiracial population as well. With regards to our socioeconomic demographics, we have extreme wealth in our district. We have a very solid middle to upper middle class, and then we also have about 30% of our student population who experience poverty as well. You can also see there a little bit over 10% of our students classify as English language learners as well. So we are seeing an ever increasing number of students who are entering the United States, not proficient in English, and we are working hard to not only address their needs, but also center our well-being focus around them and all the students in our district also. If you want to advance to the next slide. Our well-being focus has certainly shifted over time, over the last 8 months. Prior to engaging in this experience with the working group and our trip over to Australia, we very much centered our work on Yale EI, which has a lot of benefits. And really, when you go into our elementary schools, you'll see Yale EI utilized a lot, to a lesser extent at the middle school ages, and certainly to an even lesser extent at the high school. For whatever reason, it didn't resonate the higher up in grade levels you went. And so when we went to Australia, we were really focusing on what can we do to really center this concept of social emotional learning at the middle and the high school. Really, one of the eye-opening moments for us was we need to engage in small yet purposeful shifts in how we address social emotional learning. So really, as many of us, not all districts, but in many districts, when you talk about SEL, it very quickly becomes a political hot potato. So what we've purposely done is shift our language around and away from SEL, away from wellness, just talk about the overall sense of student well-being. How are students doing? And we're utilizing our school counselors and our teachers and all of our educators to really focus on how can we help facilitate methods where we build our relationships with students, and what are the strategies that we can utilize every day? Can we do something for 45 seconds to a minute and a half that makes those connections with our students? Purposeful work, but doesn't take away a large chunk and doesn't get viewed by teachers as another thing to do. It's where I talked a little bit about those daily check-ins. How can we make sure that students are getting healthier and happier? Because we know that our students are not necessarily healthy and happy, but what can we do to move forward in that direction? And then our overall, if you move to the next concept there, our overall community focus this year has been on our hashtag #OneSuffern. We are a district that is quite diverse, 7 different schools. Everybody comes into our district with different experiences, histories, ethnicities, cultures, biases, but together we are one community and we are one Suffern. And this work that we had with the Australia experience next year is translating into how can we help solidify and make stronger, more purposeful connections between our students and between our students to our educators. Thank you.
Erik, thanks so much for sharing that. And I think it was really interesting that you talked about the need to move away from the terminology of SEL and move into that, calling it well-being. And I know certainly in the US, there's a whole political piece there that let's get away from the politics and let's just think of the kids and their families and our staff, and how do we come up with a term that really describes what we're trying to get at, right? It was interesting when we first started with Karanga, and it was a real global group that was coming together to, decide what we would call this organization, et cetera. And the first thing that happened was that we said that we would, it had to be more than SEL, because our colleagues from India and from that part of the world, a lot of our colleagues from Africa said that they didn't use the term SEL, they didn't use social emotional learning, they used the term life skills. And again, something that they could relate to. And so we ended up calling it the Global Alliance for SEL and Life Skills. And the second thing, coming up with a name, and we were trying to think of a name, and Karanga is actually a Maori term that says a calling together. And so very much like your hashtag One Suffern, how do you call the community together and make sure that every child feels like they can be proud of their identity and see themselves as that bigger collective. It's the very essence of what we mean by social emotional learning. The emotional part is self, and the social is obviously the interacting and being part of a community.
Thank you. I agree. It's getting away from the buzzwords, getting away from the acronyms, and really just addressing what it is we're really looking to do. And that's a hard thing for folks to argue.
It is. It is. How do people come up with a storyline that they say, well, we don't want our kids to be well, or we don't want our community to be well, or adults to be well. So it's something, finding the language that works best for your community. And that's very much, we'll continue on with Gudiel and with Melissa, but please, for the panelists, feel free to jump in and introduce yourself. Feel free to ask questions. The only thing that you have to do on the chat is just to scroll down. You may jump on and it may say host and panelists. You have to scroll down to everyone to make sure that we can see your questions or your comments. Erik, thank you. We're going to come back and we're going to learn a little bit more about what a district outside of New York City and the work that you're doing and how that's impacting your students and staff. I'm going to go next to Gudiel, and thrilled to have you here with us, Gudiel. Let's hear what's happening in Lynwood, California.
Thank you, Jennifer, and good morning, everyone from Los Angeles here in California. So Lynwood Unified is located about 12 miles southeast of LA. We have 18 schools, about 12,000 students, and here you can see our demographics. We're predominantly Black and Brown, 94% Latino, and about 4 to 5% African American. 94% of our students qualify for free reduced lunch. And we have about 30% of our students who we identify as English learners. Lynwood, you go on to the next slide. Lynwood is a community with limited resources. It's a beautiful community with some awesome and incredible scholars and families, and at the same time, limited resources. So for us, when we started thinking about SEL, California was pushing school districts to basically adopt SEL curriculum. And we wanted to join this network to be able to learn from other organizations in terms of their journeys, what they've learned, mistakes, et cetera, and their successes. Because honestly, we were not ready to move forward with full-on SEL implementation. And then, of course, the pandemic hits, and everybody's trying to figure this out as well. Let me just share with you a little bit of what we've done so far this year as a result of our conversation. So we committed to hiring specialists to help out at our elementary schools, expanded the counselors and social workers at our middle schools and high schools. And for us, it was about how do we build capacity in a systematic way that provides and expands direct services for our students. But as Jennifer mentioned earlier, is also understanding that in order for this to happen, we had to take care of our adults and build the capital there with them so that it's sustainable and it's throughout the district and it's not just in isolation. What we're planning on expanding for next year is every school site having a committee so that we can come together on a regular basis to look at our data, look at where our kids are, their needs, staff needs, and then also be able to move forward. We're going to be working with our school sites to make sure that we have some action plans, not that we put on the shelf or for anyone to see, but for us to be able to hold ourselves accountable and to be very direct in terms of what our expectations are. And then we're launching a Zone to Grow platform, and it's just basically our own platform that allows us to look at our data in real time, to be able to look at the indicators that can help us shift resources, reflect on our practices, and be able to provide the multi-tiered systems of support. Let's go to the next slide. So what have our SEL specialists done this year? You can click on it once more, I think. So here you can see that, I'm sorry, just keep on clicking until it gets to all the bullets. Thank you. So again, for us, it's about building the capacity with our adults and being able to provide those direct services. So we started off by making sure that in the induction, our SEL specialists also got training and clear expectations in terms of who we are as an organization and what our needs are. So there you can see at a glance some of the work that they did throughout this year. And again, this started off a little bit late into the year because at the start of the year, we were really trying to focus on hiring and making sure that we brought in the right people. And we were not necessarily looking for people who had the knowledge and experience, but people who believed in the work and we felt that had the capacity to continue growing and learning as well. Let's go on to the next slide, please. And so this is just a picture that we have here. Oh, I'm sorry. This is the multi-tiered systems of support. So again, it's how do we, in a comprehensive manner, develop a system that addresses the sustainability, building capacity, and providing the direct services to kids. And what I'll tell you is that during our virtual meetings prior to the trip to Australia, we learned and benefited so much from hearing from other school districts throughout the country and in other areas who were able to share their experiences, some of the benefits and some of the things that they learned maybe the hard way. And as a result of those conversations, we were able to dig deeper, ask questions about what would it look like in terms of putting something like this in place in our district. So as a result of those conversations, as a result of the meeting, we actually doubled down on our commitment with budget, financing this, speaking with our school board and speaking with our 3 associations, our teachers and classified staff, and being really committed to being more proactive in building capacity at an earlier age, as opposed to responding and trying to, help adults with trauma, trying to support kids with trauma as well. And let's go on to the next slide. This is just a picture. So you can see our health collaborative. We have over 40 different partners that we come together with 4 times a year. And we've developed a robust system where we can refer our students for additional services while maintaining confidentiality. And at the same time, be able to increase our capacity as a system so that we have social workers at our secondary schools and our specialists over at the elementaries who are able to provide direct services to kids, but also go into classrooms and work with teachers to continue building the capacity. I know I've got over my time, so I'll stop there. And looking forward to hearing from Melissa next.
Gudiel, it's fascinating to see the systems that you're putting in place. And, that's the fun about having 3 superintendents together in one panel, because, as participants, we're listening to the different variations and we learn so much. It's like you said, Gudiel, when you're hearing how other districts have done things and you think, well, maybe we'll try that. And you learn from some of the steps that they've already taken, right? Instead of having to start at step 1. Fascinating.
Absolutely.
Fascinating to see how that goes. I'm curious, Gudiel, just before we go on to Melissa, you talked about the idea of hiring SEL specialists in each one of your schools. And I did some work in Portugal with our colleague who's now the deputy minister there, Pedro Cunha. And the ministry in Portugal is looking at implementation of SEL and well-being initiatives right across the country. And they provided funding for their schools to be able to have that specialist that will, just help coordinate things. And it's an interesting approach, and it's having really, a strong impact on the ability to get those kinds of programs and things like that happening. So, we'll go deeper into your experience with those specialists. And, there's always a big debate with specialists. It doesn't matter whether they're reading specialists or math specialists or SEL specialists. It's, does that mean that person is going to feel like they're the only ones responsible and the rest of the staffs, point down the hall and say it's that person? But I'm certainly seeing lots of evidence that if it's done properly and if it's done well, then that's the job of the principal and the superintendent, is to make sure that everybody sees that they have a role, and this specialist is there to support them in their roles of leading those kind of practices in their classrooms.
Yes, absolutely.
So we'll circle back and talk a little bit more afterwards. Melissa, over to you. Curious to see how your district has implemented in El Segundo, California.
Yeah, so like Gudiel, we're also located in California. There's roughly 1,000 school districts in California. So as I think about our SEL journey, it really started more than 5 years ago when through Digital Promise, I had an opportunity to hear Mark Brackett speak. And one of the things when I think about our school district was the need for a systemic approach. And so hearing Dr. Brackett speak about the Yale Ruler program, it meant the fact that it was aligned with Castle approach. It was research-based. It was systemic. So the approach works whether it's at the preschool or at the elementary or at the middle and high school. But like Erik, we too struggled at our middle and high school level to deepen our work in really embracing fully the social emotional learning concept. And it really wasn't until the pandemic hit and we had to shift to online learning for a considerable amount of time that we saw teachers really kind of reevaluating some of that. So we've got 6 schools, 3,500 students. We're located neighboring Manhattan Beach, LAX, and the Pacific Ocean. Next slide. So we are a very diverse school district. So we've got students from all of the various ethnicities, and it is a very rich mix of who comes to school here. When we think about our students, we also have a very affluent area. So as Gudiel talked about, the fact that he has students of poverty, we have students of affluence. So El Segundo actually gets its name from meaning the second, and we are home to the second Chevron refinery. And it was very much a blue collar town that over time, because of location specifically and real estate prices, we are now serving a much more affluent community. So when we think of students of need, we have only 13.5% of our students that are English learners or foster youth or students that are socially disadvantaged youth. So our next slide. So our graduation rate is very high. These are our demographics as far as at-promise students. And when we think about our community, what we really saw happening and where we saw the need for SEL was any student, regardless of their background, we're all doing the best we can on behalf of our own communities that we serve. And our students had a lot of pressures. And so through the California Healthy Kids survey and then through our Panorama survey, we were seeing students who had increasing levels of anxiety and depression and feeling a great deal of pressure to get into the college that they wanted to, navigating conflicts or issues with peers, just feeling societal pressures and how to handle those. And so it was very, very apparent, although we are high performing, that with that also comes pressures on behalf of our students. So we really embrace the ruler approach. With our work with this group, we specifically were able to also have SEL lead teachers at the schools. And the ruler approach specifically starts with the teachers first. So the whole first year, you work with the staff on developing wellness and understanding of feelings and recognizing feelings and how we're going to work together. And so this journey has not only been with students, but it really started with staff, shifted more towards students, and now we've shifted back to staff and students and district alike. And next slide. Our district North Star is our graduate profile. So one of the key competencies on this profile is for our students to be responsible, self-directed, and resilient individuals. And as part of that is the need for emotional intelligence, to have empathy, and really develop as a human being. And so that is really where our SEL work is. And so what we wanted to do was not necessarily continue to add on other things, but was continuing to deepen the work that we were already doing. I'm sure as any superintendent across the nation, we all felt teachers having pressures with, please don't give us one more thing. So what we had to do was really build understanding with the next step in SEL was not another thing, but it was deepening the work that we were already doing. So as we looked at deepening our work at the secondary level, what really evolved through our global work with Digital Promise and specifically our visitation to Melbourne was our next step was the development of wellness center at the middle and high school, because we can't just lean on our teachers or our counselors or our SEL leads to be that triage. And our school psychologists, as they stand here in California, primarily have roles to that are related to our special education populations. So they assess students. They might provide mental health services to those students that specifically have it as part of their IEP. Whereas there are other students that don't have that safety net. So I'm very pleased that through our visit to Australia, wellness was something that was not a liability or something that was bad. It was embraced as this is a tool that we need as high school students to just continue to grow as a healthy adult. And so it was embraced as a resource and not as something that was adverse. And so it really excites me that I was able to come back and work with our boards of education on systemic level to say, we need a wellness center and I need funding for it at both the middle and high school. And I'm happy to say that the board fully embraced that and we're moving forward. Thank you.
Melissa, I love this graphic and that of the graduate profile. I think it's really simple. Sometimes the graduate profiles get so busy that you almost think like, I'm not sure if I could graduate based on the requirements of the profile, but I like how it's centered around 5 different areas and you can build on that, right? What does that look like at the different age levels within your system? You bring up the idea of middle and high school, and I think Erik, you talked about that as well. And that's an interesting conversation, right? Because I think we all assume that, you know, kindergarten teachers, they're thinking about that whole child and well-being, and they're not as focused on the academics part, although they're very focused. I'm not trying to say yeah, you know what I'm trying to say. But sometimes as we get up into middle schools and high schools, it's more of a focus on content, academics and content than it is on, you know, what actually helps children to learn. And one of the things that I found with participating in the OECD study on social emotional learning was that the research was very clear that children that had higher social emotional skills were actually better able to learn the academics. And children that were doing well with academics actually had a positive impact on their sense of well-being and on their ability to develop those social emotional skills. And the other thing that was really great when I walked back into my system of 75,000 students to talk to the principals from our elementary and secondary schools, I said, you know, one of the best things is that the literature is also very clear that social emotional skills develop later and continue to develop later into life. And so it's a positive thing for our middle school and our high school teachers to know that the research is very clear that those developing brains, they can have a massive impact. Those skills can continue to develop well beyond high school level and into adulthood as well. So it's kind of a comforting piece and a way to get bring our middle and high school teachers on board with this kind of work. Thank you.
I know when I kicked off the school year, Jennifer, I literally led with the message that relationships first, lead with relationships first and academics will follow. And I thought it was important for our teachers to hear that from me, right? Because it's not just about test scores. And in a high achieving community, I think they feel pressure of that sort. And I hope that, they really have embraced that and are gaining better understandings. In May, we just had our first employee appreciation event, where we went to a local art gallery and we just hosted a buffet and just fellowship time with one another. And their minds were blown that it was about wellness for all of us as an organization. And our board members were there, and we raffled off vouchers for Amazon so that they could buy something for their classroom or for their trade or whatever their job was. And people really loved it. They were surprised. And so I think wellness and well-being, as Erik said, is organizationally a focus.
Amazing. And, you're from a higher socioeconomic level, your district, your area, and it's good to think about those kids as well. We know, the research is really clear as far as stress and anxiety and high expectations from parents and feeling a sense of, can they compete with their peers? We know that they need to have that sense of well-being, and that, if we're catering to those children from those communities, that they deserve to have our thinking on that as well. Thanks, Melissa. That's great. I see Karen has made a comment, and she talks about the journey of skills through life for sure. And so this idea that, it's happening right in our kindergarten classes, through into our elementary schools, through high schools, and then continuing on into post-secondary and into the workplace. And I think that's some of the fun about this, is that there is more of a focus all the way through now. For sure. Heather, I'm going to circle back to you. Give me a little bit of sense about the report. I know you posted the link into the report. Tell us a little bit what some of the key findings in that report.
Yeah, well, I think the superintendents did a great job of kind of outlining what those were. But, we really looked at how one of the things, besides the actual pieces that they implemented, were how do we learn from working groups like this? Like, how do we make the most of this time together? And I think we touched on one, which is really, we had a rich group from around the world, and a lot of them had already been doing a lot of the social emotional learning work. So one thing was just to take advantage of the knowledge that was within the groups. So we were able to allow some of the different superintendents to share the work that and I think involving the right people in the work too. Like, we had the superintendents as part of the group, but then they would bring in the people who were working on social emotional learning to be part of those webinar conversations, those virtual site visits that we did to Surrey. And then also, each brought somebody with them to Australia too, somebody who would actually be implementing. So I think that was a really important piece as well. And then I think, one piece that came out of this was thinking about that curation of resources. Like, we know that we want to provide a lot of materials and things for our educators, but you can't just put it all in one spot and expect them to sift and sort and go through. So really curating the things that we think will work for them in the day-to-day, and helping them to see how to use some of those pieces too, was something else that came out of the group. I don't know if our superintendents have anything else to add to that, like how we made that working group work for us.
Yeah, so I could jump in for a second, Heather. The working group itself, the interactions that the superintendents have with one another is fantastic. Often, as I'm sure Gudiel and Melissa would, I would imagine, agree, we can get distracted really quickly, right? There are other things that pop up. So it was really critical that you allowed us to invite one or two other folks from our district who are much more embedded in this work to be a part of it, because they continue to remind us about the progress that we need to make, what we need to facilitate as superintendents, and really the detailed work that they're taking care of. The other aspect that I thought was really good were the folks that were not involved in the study group. We visited a couple of phenomenal schools and got to hear from some really interesting people. In particular, I was on the bus that went to the Carey School. It was a Baptist K through 12 school. And just as Melissa has really made a focus on staff well-being and having that type of event that she had talked about, that was a way of life at the Carey School. They talked about a multiple day staff experience at the end of the summer where they all went away for team building, collegial check-ins, and learned at the same time strategies that they could utilize in their classrooms to help build relationships. We call it mental health first aid over here. They just talked about checking in on kids. And the dynamic that you saw in that building was really powerful for me. It was just the sense of a welcoming sense for all students, where they felt that they had multiple adults that they could go to and confide in when they were having challenges, or just even to talk to. And I think that's something that we need to particularly remember here in the US, especially when you go to the middle school and the high school, when students have multiple teachers. That is, I think, Jennifer, you said before, elementary school teachers are focused on the child and growing the child. Once we become departmentalized and we get older, we need to help teachers learn how to do that again. It's one thing as a teacher to say, oh, I have a great relationship. You have a great relationship with the students that likely you identify with in your classrooms, but are you going out of your way to foster and check in on and provide strategies for students who maybe you don't identify as easily with? Those are the things that I really took away from the working group and those outside of the working group.
I just wanted to add, as the leader of this school district, when I work with my principals and my directors this year, and they considered like, what are their objectives they're going to work on? I kept it simple. 3 things. Obviously, academic achievement matters. We're not going to debate that. But number 2 was SEL. It was SEL and graduate profile. And what are you doing to move the needle there? And last was personal well-being. I made them and said, goal 3 is your personal well-being. What are you going to do? So when I show I'm valuing it, they will show they value it. And then we've had reflective conversations about what they're doing in that area. So it's really kind of retooling instead of like what, go, just do it. It's got to be, let's stop, let's pause, let's talk to one another, and let's continue to focus on well-being consciously.
What I just want to add on is that those visits and the presentations and the panelists that were in Australia also helped me take a step back. And it's not just about the academic outcomes, but what are we doing to take care of ourselves? And, as Melissa and Erik have said, it's how are we as superintendents modeling this? And so one of the things that we did to start off our school year this year at our admin retreat is I brought in another organization, Mind Body Awareness, and we started off by breathing and going through these exercises. And it was a little bit uncomfortable for some of us, right? Close your eyes, picture this. But it was so important for us to be able to actually do it and practice it, because how can we expect our teachers to take care of themselves and to be there for kids if we're not leading the way by example? And then throughout the year, we had some additional sessions. We were actually fortunate to take one of our high school principals. And so we now have throughout the district Wellness Wednesdays, but our high school principal has not only a wellness center at her school, but they do things like yoga. And they come together and do the sound bar, and they're doing some other pretty cool things that's now expanding from the teachers who wanted to join to all staff, doing things for students and for parents. And so it's growing from there. And now our principals are also talking about what they can do and to support their adults as well as the kids at their different school sites.
This is so amazing. And this is exactly why I wanted to end the school year with a panel of superintendents, because all 3 of you have talked about leadership, the leadership element, that you have to model it. You have to give people permission to be talking about this and to be thinking about themselves. And the only way that they're going to do that in their schools is if we set that intent, right? And give them permission to take care of themselves, take care of each other, et cetera. It's modeling and giving permission, because especially in an environment, I know in the US, you're very test driven and it's hard to counter that, right? So it must mean so much to them when the 3 of you are standing up and in very different ways, showing them that this is the way that we'll be creating those conditions across the district so that they can then create them within their schools. One of you, there's a question coming in from Amy, and Erik, you connected to it a little bit. Amy's talking about the challenges. A number of you have talked about middle and high school, and that, you know, in the homeroom system in elementary schools, it's a little bit easier to kind of talk about that whole child. They're seeing the child for most of the day, etc. And what are some of the strategies that you've used with your middle and secondary school teachers to really give them permission to not have to be, you know, jamming the content and the academic, but that they'll actually have more kids being successful if it's a combination of building relationships and making time for a healthy environment, learning environment in their classrooms and in their schools. So a couple of things that you've seen since you've put that emphasis on middle and high schools.
Sure. So we are by no means successful in this area. That's what was so powerful about the experience with the working group and the visit to Australia. But one of the things I see naturally more so at the middle school is this concept of teaming, right? So you have teams of teachers that meet weekly on a group of students that are part of their team. So there's still that closer connection between a group of teachers and the students and how they're doing. Of course, as you go up to the high school, oftentimes the mentality at the high school is if a child has challenges or issues or mental health concerns, you go and see your school counselor. Although I think the role of the school counselor is incredibly important, that's the area of focus that our director of counseling and well-being this year is developing for next year, to give what tools, what simple activities can we have teachers engage in every day, every couple of days in their classrooms to help create that welcoming environment and that connection that you can make with students. Another quick expansion where I believe that we as a district need to do more work on is the aspect of well-being and athletics, especially on your athletic teams where parents and students and communities invest heavily in success athletically. We often spend a lot of time on professional development for our teachers, but I don't think we do enough with regards to student well-being in athletics, competitive athletics. And that's another area that we're looking to focus on for next year to help support our coaches and help support our student athletes who find themselves with a tremendous amount of pressure on them.
That's interesting. Yeah, you know, athletics is supposed to be fun, right? And it's supposed to be something that, you know, is you know, gives them an opportunity to not have to be focusing on their studies. And we know that, you know, taken to the extreme, it's just another level of pressures. So interesting that you're working on that, Erik. Gudiel, anything on the K to or the middle high school that you've been doing with your teachers?
Would it be okay if I talk a little bit about Karen's comment? I'm just looking at it in the chat. So,
of course. Yeah,
I
was going to go there right after.
Yeah,
so
you know why? Because she mentions the indigenous, and that it reminds her of it, and that was one of the fantastic things that I experienced in Australia, is the First Nations people talking about so many different things and their values, and you know, the way they see things. And the need for us as a society to, again, take a step back and look at things holistically and not just focus in on some narrow outcomes. And that was one of the things that I found so moving and powerful in terms of my perspective. And that when we came back to Lynwood, we have a land acknowledgement that we worked with local Indigenous people leaders in our community, and trying to incorporate some of those values into how we do things and how we're moving forward, and not just so focused on those academic outcomes. And I'll share something else, is that when we started our work in Lynwood back in about 10 years ago, we were so intent on graduation rates and you know, A through G, the college requirements. And we got some really good outcomes. And we went from 70% graduation rates to the 80s. But we took a step back and we said to ourselves, you know, we really need to do a better job of addressing the whole needs of the child. And so we invested in more counselors and social workers, our health collaborative. And as a result of those efforts, we went from the 80s in terms of graduation rates to the 90s. And so we saw the immediate benefit of being proactive and building up children and addressing their needs in so many different ways. And so that's what you know, when I saw Karen's comment, I had to just talk about that. And then the other thing that we did is we no longer have police on our campuses. We said we'd rather invest those dollars into proactive ways that, again, build capacity in a nurturing environment and to inspire and give our kids hope. And so those are just some of the other things that I wanted to share. And that's more involved to the direct impact to the middle schools and our high schools as well.
Thanks, Gudiel. Melissa, anything on your middle and high school? How do you help those teachers really see themselves as, give them permission to not have to be worrying so much about not focusing uniquely on the content of their subject area, but really that they're responsible for that whole child?
Yeah, I think some of our work in culturally responsive teaching and pedagogy has been helpful to actually complement that as well. And like Erik, we're actually trying to provide them a few more scaffolds on how to have those conversations, whether it's like, a little, a question of the day to start out, and how to, be intentional as it relates to those topics so that they're not searching and having to prepare one more thing, whether that's in an advisory or homeroom type of a moment in a smaller or prolonged period of time. So really looking at that. And I too wanted to just mention the discussions, panels, and content as it related to the Indigenous people, both in Surrey and the way they honor all of the Indigenous tribes and forefathers, and then also in Melbourne, was really eye-opening to me. And it really, I felt more competent to have discussions around race after hearing some of the strong testimonies of those panelists. Was very powerful.
And that's what's great, Melissa, right? We learn from each other, right? You see that, the advantage that we have when we're talking, to jurisdictions globally. You see the efforts that they're making in particular areas, and you think, yeah, we can go down that path as well. Bev has jumped on, and Bev is an amazing colleague out of Ontario. And she has done a ton of work and continues to do a ton of work with Indigenous educators. And she puts in there, it's a global issue, 370 million Indigenous peoples in 70 nations globally, like Australia, New Zealand, issues affecting First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, and rebuilding trust in education is very important. And in Canada, we did a miserable job, and we are trying to make sure that we are all looking at how can we support each other, and how can we make sure that our Indigenous and our non-Indigenous children learn more about the Indigenous ways, for sure. For sure. Heather, last thing that we'll kind of circle around to, any advice that you have based on the networks as far as superintendents and district leaders, school leaders, what are the kinds of things that they can be doing to create that culture of well-being within their schools? What are some of the things that you noticed either in the seminars, from visiting other jurisdictions, from what the superintendents were seeing? How do you create that environment, those conditions, so that well-being is thriving in the organizations?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we touched on that already with the modeling of what they want the teachers and educators to do, and starting, we had a lot of conversations around starting with the adult educators first, and really making sure that they were okay, especially because we started this work in fall of 2020 and early 2021. So it was really heavily in COVID, when everybody was really struggling. So, having that openness, I think, to really discuss these issues, to discuss, the stigma around some of these pieces. I think another piece that we talked about quite a bit, that, when you talk about wellness, and we had a great panel of students from Scotland who are doing some work to address the stigma in their system. So that was one thing we saw, is working with the students as well, and helping them to be leaders in these conversations. I think it's really important as well.
Nice. Anything, Gudiel? Any comments to add to that?
No, I mean, I was just grateful for the opportunity. And as we continue our learning journey, will continue reaching out to other school districts and superintendents to continue learning from each other. And I think that's so valuable and important, and it cannot be underestimated.
True that, Gudiel, that learning stamps, and that's part of the modeling as well, right? When our teams see that we are interested in learning with them and from other jurisdictions, it opens up the possibility that they can be doing that as well.
Yeah, and then I would also add to that, it's just listening and being intentional about listening and creating spaces where we can hear directly from our teachers, our students, family members, and others about, what are the shifts? What do we need to do differently? And how do we continue growing as well?
Nice. Thank you, Gudiel. Melissa, any advice to
Yeah,
superintendents, school leaders?
I would just want to say, build your network. I think, Gudiel and Erik are people I feel I could call. They're in my phone, right? Erik and I have a lot of district commonalities, right? And so it doesn't matter if you're East Coast, West Coast, Australia, we are all facing the same challenges, and each serving our communities the very best we can. So I would just say, cast a wider net, open yourself up. This is a very isolating job. And if you allow the walls to close in on you, they will. And so realize that everybody is in the boat together. We're all trying to do our best work on behalf of kids and build that network. Because this network that we had an opportunity to be a part of, it was absolutely a profound experience.
Wonderful, Melissa, that whole concept of creating networks. Erik, you're going to have the last word.
It's a little bit tough to add on to those last two comments, of course. So I agree with everything that everybody has already said. The only thing I'd like to throw out as a reminder to folks is be careful about folks who are trying to sell you a SEL curriculum, a well-being curriculum, whatever it is. It's not a curriculum per se, it's more of a state of being. And I think that's why, when you look at Melissa and Gudiel and myself and the others on these working groups, I believe that we embody what we're looking for our educators with regards to how they behave with each other and their students, right? Make sure you take care of yourself. Make sure you understand that to be well is the most important thing before you can succeed athletically or academically. And enjoy what you're doing. This is important work. And I think we can make continual great strides by learning from one another and learning from the work that's being done in other countries as well.
Erik, what a great way to end off things by saying it's a state of being. And, I know I speak on behalf of the registrants that are going to be watching the on-demand version of this. Gudiel and Melissa and Erik and Heather, thank you for sharing your work. It's really important for people to know that we're all trying to get at the best thing for our kids and for our staffs and for our communities. So that's wonderful. Thank you. We're going to end off just with a couple of quick little slides. And just to remind people, Knowledge Hook is, as I mentioned, a digital math company. There are free resources if you have math teachers and math leaders and math coaches. We have a parallel to this thought leadership series for senior administrators and for school leaders. We also have one around math leadership. So you're welcome to share that with your teams. And I think we've got one more. Yeah, this is one that you might want to access. We pulled together a series of 10 contributors from former rounds of these roundtables and our podcasts. And we pulled together kind of their thoughts on equity. And we are going to be coming out with one on well-being, hopefully by the fall. But this is a really interesting one, super simple. The format is 10 pages, 1 page for each of these academics or education leaders with kind of a Q&A based on the content that they brought forward in their discussions. So it's an opportunity to kind of get a look at right across a whole number of thinkers. What does this look like? So again, it's free. You can access it on that link. And finally, we just finished a podcast with Damien Cooper. He is an assessment specialist out of Canada and does a lot of work in the US. And he has just released a book on rebooting assessment. And a lot of things that we talked about today, very much in the most recent podcast. So you're welcome to jump on and access those as you want. So we have come to the end of our session already. Heather, Gudiel, Melissa, and Erik, thank you so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thanks to the audience. We look forward to seeing you in the fall.